Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you for attending our interview tips workshop. And my goal and intent for this workshop is for us to go over questions that you may encounter. And I wanted to thank Elizabeth for providing me a list of some of the questions that your classmates have provided to her so that we can go over them. I actually have my own list of questions, but the way I'll prioritize this session is I will go over the questions that Elizabeth sent me first, and then we'll go over the ones that I had, right? And so as we navigate each one of these questions, I want to remind you when they're asking these questions, I want you to kind of think in your head, let's read in between the lines. What are they really trying to assess? And these perspectives are from my previous experience having been in the program director's world, and Jennifer Wilson, which I think many of you have already met already, who is a program coordinator um, currently for neurology at one of our local programs. And so our perspectives are what I hope and consider are going to be insider tips to help you best prepare for these interviews. So let's go over the first question. So the first question is, tell me about a time where you made a mistake in clinical care and what did you learn from it? So in my opinion, the way I'm looking at this question is I look at it as this question is trying to assess your learning curve and your willingness to know where you're at in your training and to recognize, in my opinion, your potential and willingness to improve. And and I want to emphasize that it's most importantly is your willingness to improve, right? It's the humility behind it, right? That's a huge part of medicine. And the way I would approach this is it doesn't really matter, in my opinion, what example you give, but it's what you should mention. So I would recommend you would say something to the effect of, from this experience, I learned that one, it's important to know your limitations. To number two, know when to reach out for help. And you're in a learning environment, right? You have senior residents when you're an intern, you have senior residents, you have other residents, consultants, attendings, people you can ask for help. And third, that ultimately your goal is to pay it forward to future patients, right? It's okay to make mistakes initially, right? But your goal is to learn so that you don't make the same mistake again and you provide better care to your patients in the future. So that's how I would personally answer that question. Let's go to our next question that Elizabeth sent me. So the next question was describe a situation where you received critical feedback and how did you handle it? So, in essence, in my opinion, this question is basically trying to assess your humility, again, your willingness and desire to grow and to learn, right? Feedback is a huge part of your medical education. I know you've already all experienced this, but it's a probably even a bigger part of your residency training. So I think one of the better ways to answer this is to share an example of something you received and state, while this feedback may have been excuse me, difficult for me to hear, it's important to realize where these comments originate from. It comes from a place where someone really wants me to learn, to improve, so that I can provide better care to my next patients. And what I would recommend you say something is to this effect, and as long as you keep your patient's interests, their best interests at heart and at the center of your moral compass, all feedback, whether it's small or big or critical, or like I said, even difficult to hear, all of those things remind you that in the end, the bigger picture, the bigger end game is that they're trying to improve you so that you can provide better care to your patients. So that's how I would answer this question. And Elizabeth, by the way, the questions that you were able to share with me from your classmates, these are great thought-provoking questions. So I'm glad we're able to go through these. Um, the next one, tell me about a time where you had a disagreement with a team member or an attending. How did you handle it and what did you learn? So, in my opinion, this question is trying to address a few things, but it's rooted in my opinion, in respect, compassion, and understanding. So, the way I would approach this, again, it doesn't really matter what example you give or provide, but I would say, what I've learned from this is that people have disagreements all the time, and especially in patient care. There's more than one way of doing something, but ultimately, we all share a common shared goal, which is to provide great care to our patients. And ultimately, what this experience has taught me is that through listening, to try to gain understanding of someone else's perspective and to do so with compassion, respect, and I think the key word here is going to be this, is to create a safe space for them, to give them that safe space. It's so important so that people's different thoughts, their opinions, um, that their ideas are respected despite what differences you may have. And again, it's rooted in the fact that you're just trying to provide great care to your patients, right? So that's how I would address this. Let's see here. The next question Elizabeth sent me was, let's see here. Tell me about a time where you advocated for a patient when your team disagreed with you. So I think this is a really interesting question to ask. Um, so what I would say to this is it's assessing a couple things, right? It's assessing your capacity to work in the setting of a team, to understand your role, um, and third, as I said earlier on the previous question, to always keep your patient's best interest at heart and the center of your moral compass. So again, the example isn't as important as what you state. What's important, in my opinion, is what you learn, right? And what you're saying that you learn from this. So um, I would essentially go with, while there's disagreements, again, we're all here to provide outstanding patient care, excellent patient care to our patients, and that you need to understand it's important that you understand your role and your place in the healthcare team, whether in the capacity as a medical student, whether you're an intern next year or a senior resident. You're all trying to learn. And I think it's important to emphasize this. You're trying to learn why your team has that different approach, right? And to have that safe space. Again, this is where safe space is also important to be able to share your own thoughts. And obviously, if there are very egregious things that you completely disagree with, or you think that jeopardizes patient care, there's always avenues and pathways for you to approach that too, whether you go to your program director, for example, so that you can continue to advocate for your patients if it's completely, you feel like completely is going to jeopardize your patient's care, which I hope none of you will encounter next year, but things like that do happen. So that's how I would answer this question. The next one is, let's see here. How do you manage a difficult family or an angry patient? So the way I would answer this is, I would start off with a patient example. Again, think of something from your own experiences. But I would also say this question is also rooted in compassion and understanding, right? Because you never know what a patient or their family is truly experiencing unless you are actually in their shoes. So, in my opinion, for you to be able to listen, to sit down and learn as they share their stories with you, it gives you the ability to at least try to see things from their vantage point, right? To be able to see things from their perspective. And oftentimes in medicine, you can be disconnected from the realistic impact that things that to us might seem ordinary or mundane, but to your patients, it actually means something. It means a huge deal, right? And so be able to sit down, listen, and see where they're coming from. For the most part, while patients may not be happy, they might even be angry, like this question states. I think at the end, they'll respect that. So, as an example for me, um, when I think of this question, I think of a patient I saw when I worked at UC Irvine. As many of you know, I worked at the Federally Qualified Health Center in the city of Anaheim, which was UC Irvine's main um, clinic for providing indigent care. The vast majority of my patients I saw were homeless, and in one particular patient, I remember this patient was extremely difficult. She would come in screaming, angry all the time whenever she would see me. And she actually was living at a local homeless shelter, in and out. But most nights she was at a homeless shelter because I would see her on my drive when I would leave the clinic in the evenings. Um, but anyway, so she was homeless, and I remember for the longest time I was trying to get her to start insulin, and every single time I brought it up because her A1C, I don't know, was like 14 or 15, it was out of control. Every time I brought it up, she would get very upset. But I felt like as a physician, I needed to give her options, right? Um, and I knew she had access to store it because in the shelter there was a refrigerator, and I had other patients who had the ability of doing that as well. But it was for the longest time I couldn't understand exactly why, other than I knew she was upset, and she just seemed to be upset every time. And then one day when I asked her, she told me something that changed my perspective forever. She said to me, "Doctor, do you know what happens to a single homeless woman on the street with syringes?" And I thought about it and I thought, "Oh my gosh." And she said, "Yes, they will physically harm me. They will completely try to physically harm me." for those syringes because it's like currency on the street. They can use that for drugs, right? And so it was heartbreaking for me to think of that. And I still remember this patient to this day. It's been over 10 years since I've last seen her because I left UCI, like 8 years ago. But this perspective changed the entire way I look and how I approach patients. So I would say this, the key emphasis behind this is it's important to see things through the vantage point of their family before you take a personal affront to it, right? Try to disassociate your feelings from it. The anger is just it really this whole time I realized it wasn't really towards me. And so I think it's important for you to emphasize that the anger really isn't directed towards you, it's directed towards the situation and to approach it with compassion, to see it from the vantage point of the patient. I think that carries a long way. So that's how I would approach answering this question. Um, let's see here. The next question Elizabeth has is how to navigate or respond to illegal questions. So, as you know, there are many questions that residency programs cannot ask you. They can't ask you things related to religion, age, gender, race, marital status, family planning. Those are illegal questions. They're not allowed to ask that, and those are match violations through the NRMP. But what I would emphasize is I will tell you, I've been on the flip side of things on the program director side, and I will tell you, I've seen it happen. And for the most part, I would say it usually occurs in interviewers that are new, or it's being done out of perhaps they don't know or it's ignorance on their part versus an actual intent to discriminate. I hope it's not that. So I would look at it that way, right? And so there's a couple ways how you can answer this. Either you actually answer their question, which I personally, if you feel uncomfortable with, I wouldn't answer it. And it's okay not to answer it. So the first one is answer it. The second one is do answer it. And how do you do answer if you don't feel like answering it, or if you don't feel comfortable answering, how do you do it? What I think is the best thing is to de-escalate it. And as I mentioned, in terms of those options, if you don't feel comfortable, again, don't. What I would say in the situation, if you're not comfortable, is I would say something to the effect of, let's say they ask you, do you plan on having a family in the next couple years, right? In essence, they're trying to ask you, are you trying to have a kid, right? And is that going to interfere with their call schedule? Do they have to find coverage for you? Which, again, like I said, that is an illegal question. What you could do is turn it on them. And I've personally had this happen when I was at UC Irvine. One of our new faculty accidentally asked a question like this, and I remember telling him, I said, "You can absolutely not ask this question." But the response from the student that the faculty member told me was fascinating because I thought that's an excellent way of not answering something without sounding like rude, right? So what the student said to them was, um, what I would say is, I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to start a family, but can you share with me how your residency program plans to support residents who are considering starting a family? And I thought, wow, that's an incredible answer. That's a great non-answer to basically turn the question on them. And let's see how they would answer that, right? So that's how I would approach it. You have a couple ways. Either you answer or you don't. And if you don't decide to answer it because you don't feel comfortable, which is your right and your prerogative, then ask them, well, how does your program plan on supporting me? Because I'm not entirely sure yet, right? And that's an honest and fair answer, for which no one can fault you for. Let's see here. This slide I have for Jennifer Wilson. Jennifer, are you on the? I can't see who's actually in the meeting with us right now. Jennifer, are you with us right now?
Yes, I'm here, Dr. Wynn.
Yeah, so I know you. I don't know if you can actually see this, but
I can. I can.
oh, you can. So, I was hoping we could talk about, the communication and how that's so important in your role as a program coordinator.
Absolutely. So, when you are sent your residency invites and the whole organization behind it, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, the person behind the curtain who does all the mastery behind the scenes, which is going to be your program coordinator. So just be mindful with your communication with the program in when you're accepting your invites. Make sure that um, you do jot down the correct time and the date. Always try to log on 5 or 10 minutes early just to ensure that you're not going to be late. You don't have any connectivity issues, anything like that. If you are finding that you have some connectivity issues, sometimes it's if you use like a virtual background because it does use more bandwidth. So you do not need to use a virtual background, first of all. And secondly, when they see you wherever it is that you're interviewing, a lot of times it makes it more real. And if they see an interesting painting or maybe something in the background, they'll ask you about it. But getting back to the communication and etiquette, just make sure that you arrive on time, that you always keep your camera on, that you stay engaged. A lot of times when you start with the interview process, your interview process, it'll start with the program giving um, a presentation, and just know that even though the other faculty members may be sharing their screen for the presentation, they're keeping tabs on any students or applicants that turn their camera off. If you don't look engaged, don't yawn, don't eat or anything, don't have your meal there while you're while you're interviewing. Um, Even if you're not on camera. And I know a lot of these things seem like common sense, but there's a reason why I'm bringing them up. It's because I have seen it through the years. And these are just things that don't come across great. So, just be mindful of that. Stay engaged, and you can smile, jot notes down during the presentation, so that when you do jump into your interviews, that you can then, because they're going to ask you if you have any kind of questions. And so if you could pull a question or two from the presentation that they provided, it shows your engagement in the program, because you want to, of course, show interest in their program. And so, just make sure that you're dressed appropriately, you're on time, um, stay engaged, have, you want to have positive, what am I looking for? Like your whole aura about yourself, stay positive. And so that's about what I have for that, Dr. Wynn. Is that
No,
okay?
that's perfect, Jennifer, and thank you for sharing that with our students.
Sure.
The other thing I would add also is in terms of, for example, for like in-person interview etiquette, what I would recommend is you should treat every part of your interview day as the interview. So yes, you'll probably have two or three or maybe even four formal sit-down interviews with other faculty or residents. I want to emphasize, there might be some downtime in between the interview sessions where you're sitting in a break room with other interviewees, other candidates for interviewing. You got to be on your best behavior. There's usually a resident who will sit in there serving as like an ambassador, kind of to sit there to answer questions. But the other part is they're looking, they're the eyes and ears of the residency program. I would always tell my resident who I would assign to that session, can you keep an eye out on their behavior? How do they treat each other? How do they treat you? How do they treat the program coordinator? Are they respectful? Are they respectful to others? Because they might put a completely different front on, right? In front of an attending, but in front of others. So that's always really important to make sure, you're always, and I know all of you already are, but to make sure that you're polite, you remain engaged. Again, don't play on your phone. Don't look at your phone if you can try to avoid it while you're there. Try to talk to other people and sound interested in their program, right? Because obviously you are, but these are the things I know, again, like as Jennifer mentioned, I know they sound like it's common sense, but again, like mentioned earlier, and I will emphasize the same. I've seen the same thing over and over again in my time at UC Irvine. These things happen. So, again, these are the things that you got to keep in mind. Also, if you get invited to go to a social, let's say they invite you to a dinner or a mixer the night before, again, best behavior when you're there. Okay.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you, Dr. Wynn, and thank you for that. Ever since we have kind of moved to more of a virtual platform, I have forgotten about the in-person interview part, but absolutely. So just think that the moment you step foot, either virtually or in person, for that interview, regardless of whether it's downtime or they say it's just informal time with residents or whatever, always know that, always think that the camera is on, because the program director, the faculty, they will all talk about everything that has happened during that entire event. So yeah, just always, always be professional and always put your best foot forward. Um, so yeah, I completely agree with you, Dr. Wynn.
Excellent. Thank you, Jennifer. That's excellent insight. So now that we've gone over the questions from Elizabeth and we've gone over this piece that Elizabeth also asked, but I really appreciated having Jennifer Wilson's experience as a program coordinator share this with you, is some of the questions that I feel are generic, but you may get asked them, and so we might as well prepare for them, right? So this first one, tell me about yourself. So this question's pretty straightforward, telling the program about yourself, but I'm going to give you a format of how I typically recommend you answer this. But again, what are they trying to gauge from this? Well, they're trying to gauge whether they can work with you, right? Because at this point, it's not really about academics. It's not really about medical knowledge. You've made it this far. Someone's already screened all those things, right? It's just like when you were applying to med school. If you got an interview, your GPA and MCAT are not the issues anymore. Same thing with this. Your step score is not the issue. They're trying to gauge, are you a human being, a normal person that they can actually talk to? When it's 2 or 3 in the morning, are you someone they can depend on? So that's what they're trying to gauge from this. So the format I typically recommend in answering this is briefly state, a few things. What's your name, where you grew up, where you went to college, where you went to med school, briefly, and I mean brief, maybe 1 or 2 sentences on how you came to medicine, not the specialty, but how you came into med school in general, and then talk about something very interesting about yourself, things that you might like to do, a hobby, something like that, something that might be a little different, and then end with, and I'm super excited to be here. That's how I would recommend tell me about yourself. Now, the next question is, why are you interested in this specialty? So I think when you're put on the spot like this, obviously this question's coming, so you should be preparing for this. What I recommend is take them on a tour. Take them on a tour of your personal statement. Think of the reasons, as I work with many of you over the summer and making and working on your personal statements, think about the reasons you listed in your personal statement. You're basically going to take them on a tour of it and say it right here. It's for X, Y, and Z reasons. Um, you know, and briefly talk about each one of them, maybe 1 or 2 sentences each. This maybe is going to take you 1 to 2 minutes to do that if you follow the format I tell you. Let's say you have 3 reasons, 1 to 2 sentences each, a minute, and you're done. I always recommend you end with something to the effect of, and it's from these reasons, from these experiences that I've shared with you, that I know that this specialty is the right and only choice for me. Because you want to sound solid, you want to sound with conviction, with belief, 100% affirmation that this is exactly what you want to do for the rest of your life, right? So that's how I would answer this question. The next one is, why do you want to come to our program? So I'm going to give you all mnemonic. And for those of you who have already been meeting with me, you already know what my mnemonic is, but it's 3 parts. Okay. You can use this for any program, whether you rotated there, you're from this area, this program is in the area you live right now, or it's a program you don't even have any connections with. But as long as you remember these 3 things, there's not a single program you can answer this to. Live, learn, and have fun. So, for example, let's go through an example where this is a program you rotated through. So, let's say you did a sub-I or an away rotation, or even a third-year rotation there. You could say something to the effect of this. So, I know that residency training is going to be hard, it's going to be difficult. And I want to be in a place where I have the support, the structure, and the people who are near and dear to me in my heart to be able to support me through this. So, the first thing is this is an incredible place to live. My family's already here. They're going to be able to, or your friends, right? My family, friends, significant other are all here, and they can help me through this. I know residency is going to be hard. I want to be near them, so that I can have their support. And secondly, this is the community that I grew up in. These are the people that I want to serve. So I think it's an incredible place to live already, and I want to continue that. Secondly, here's the learn part, right? So now you're going to the second reason, the learn. I had the unique privilege to have had an opportunity to already rotate through here, you know, um, and I did a sub-I here, and I saw firsthand the outstanding education that I would get here because I got that as a medical student from the attendings, from the faculty, from the residents. They, I know what I'm getting here, and it's an outstanding education. The didactics were incredible. The camaraderie, the mentorship that are here was really great. The culture here was great. I want to be in a place where I know I'm going to be taken care of. And that's why I know that this place is going to give me an outstanding educational experience. And finally, here's the third part, to have fun. As I shared earlier, some of my hobbies are X, Y, and Z. In my spare time, let's say your hobby was hiking, right? I love hiking at Mount Rubidoux. I like checking out new restaurants at the Food Lab in downtown Riverside, or let's say it's Redlands. I like checking out the new restaurants in downtown Redlands. I like, X, Y, and Z things, and it's a great place for me to have fun outside of the hospital. And so it's for all these reasons that I know that this is the perfect program for me. So that's how I would answer that question. For a program that you either A, live in, B, rotated in, or C, let's go to this second scenario where let's say you don't have any connections. Let's say this is an out-of-state program. You never even visited them. Again, you can live, learn, and have fun there too, right? So let's say, but you're going to have to extrapolate the live part, right? By saying, let's say you like the outdoors. Let's say you like certain activities, hiking, whatever, checking out car shows, all those things. You're going to have to emphasize that in the live part. Let's say you're looking at a program in Colorado and you have a particular interest in snowboarding, those kind of things. I know it sounds cliche, but you've got to do some digging and research into those specific regions to make the live part sound great, right? Same thing with the learn and the have fun part. So live, learn, have fun is a trifold method and mnemonic that I recommend that you use to answer any question anytime when they ask you, why do you want to come to our program? And re-emphasize this. When you tell them, let's say this is a program you rotated through already, it's extremely important for you to use that piece in the learn part. I had the unique privilege of having rotated here already. You're telling them two things with this. One, I know about your program, but two, you're actually thanking them. Because think about it, when you applied for a sub-I, let's say each one of these places you applied for a sub-I, they only have, you all know this, they have maybe one, two, or maybe even three spots for each block that they're accepting away students. They picked you and they picked you for a reason, right? So you belong there. And then secondly, I would emphasize that, right? Like I had the unique privilege. You're thanking them for that opportunity because you did get a great opportunity to do it. They chose you over lots of other applicants. Okay. So that's how I would answer this question. The next one is, tell me about a time where something didn't go your way. How did you handle it? And what did you learn? So essentially, again, it doesn't matter what example you give for this, but it's all about the second part of the question. How did you handle it? And what did you learn? So what are they trying to test you with this? They're trying to test your resiliency because residency, as you know, is going to be difficult and hard. So they're testing your resiliency and your capacity for perseverance and never giving up. So I would give an example, any example, right? And then you would say, this experience has taught me that no matter what the circumstances are, when everything seems like it's not going your way, if you want something enough, if you believe in yourself and you try hard enough, that you will eventually, make things work out. And I've learned resilience and perseverance from this experience. So that's how I would answer that. Tell me about your strengths and weaknesses. So I think this is pretty straightforward as far as the strengths part. The weakness part, however, can be kind of a double-edged sword, right? There are some things you might not want to tell them, and honestly, there are some things you probably shouldn't tell them. But the way I would approach weaknesses, there's a couple ones, over the years, probably the best that I've heard, the best two examples that come up time and time again are, being hypercritical or being OCD. But again, if you look at it, both of those characteristics are very important as a physician, right? So let's talk about that. So the hypercritical one, I still remember the applicant who told me this. She said to me, she said, I tend to be a little hypercritical of myself, but it's important to remind myself I'm still a medical student. I'm still at this point going to be an intern or a resident, to give myself some grace. I'm here to learn. I will make mistakes, but my ultimate goal is to provide better care to the next patient. I thought, wow, that hypercritical ended up sounding like a strength, right? So they kind of turned it around. Yes, it is a weakness, but they're looking at it in a positive spiel. The other thing is OCD. I've heard that time and time again. So residents will tell me I tend to be a little OCD. So what I would answer to that is, again, but that allows me to be, really thorough and to provide great patient, make sure I don't miss anything. However, it could slow me down. And that's something that I'm working on. So when I hear things like that, I think those are great answers. And it's honest. And ultimately, those two characteristics are, I mean, I don't know what doctor doesn't have those. We all are, to some extent, have some of that. Um, how do you take care of yourself? So this question, is in essence really testing again the fact that you know that it's going to be hard as a resident, right? You can't take care of others if you can't take care of yourself. So it tests your ability to take care of your mind, body, spirit, and also your resiliency and your persistence. Um, Probably one of the best examples I ever heard of this was when I worked at UC Irvine and I had an applicant who told me, some of the ways that I take care of myself are I try to, here's the generic part, right? I try to work on exercise. After work, I try to go for a 15-minute walk around the neighborhood, or I'll go for a 15-minute jog. And even when I'm tired, this is how I motivate myself. I remind myself that at the end of the day, after I've seen all my patients, there's still one more patient to see. And that patient is me. Because I have to take care of myself because I know if I don't take care of myself, my mind, my body, my spirit, if I don't go for that 15-minute run, which doesn't seem like much, but at the end of the day, when you're dead, tired, and exhausted, it is a lot, then I'm not going to be able to take care of others. So there's still one more patient at the end of every single day, and that's me. So that was probably one of the best answers I had heard in my career because everything else sounds pretty generic, but that one was a great one. Let's see here. What are your future plans after residency? So just food for thought for this. So sometimes they'll ask you this question, whether what type of practice you envision yourself in, if you're considering doing a fellowship. And then in terms of practice types, there's so many different types, right? You have academic versus non-academic, private practice versus community-based, hospital versus clinic, fellowship versus, let's say, research afterwards. There's so many different opportunities for you as a physician when you're out. So just think about it. There's no real wrong answer behind this. It's just your personal preference. Um, Tell me about a memorable patient. Again, reflect on a memorable patient, talk about them. And the most important part, I think that you need to emphasize behind this is what made them memorable. For me, I will share with you probably one of my most memorable patients was the one I shared with you earlier. Um, that difficult patient that I had who wouldn't take insulin. She was memorable for a number of reasons, but you know, another example I can think of with her was that same day, after she made that comment to me that I shared with you earlier, where she said, "Do you know what would happen to a homeless female on the street with syringes?" As she turned away from me, and I'll never forget this, as she turned away from me to walk out of the exam room, I remember I was standing there next to the wall, and as she was walking, um, the back part of her pants, the front was completely clean and intact. The back was all tattered and it was ripped and torn, and it exposed the vast majority of her posterior thigh on both sides. And I thought back to what she told me. She said, "You won't know, you don't know what would happen to me." So I remember I tried during my lunch break my clinic was next to a Walmart. And I remember I went to Walmart and try to buy her a pair of sweatpants. And I tried to bring it to her because as I shared with you, I knew where she lived. She was in the shelter down the street from my clinic. I remember trying to give it to her, and again, she declined and she said, I don't want to, I don't want your help that way. I don't. And so again, I think, it taught me, this lady had an incredible amount of humility. She saw me in the capacity, I still remember this, as a homeless patient, but without any insurance. She refused to use Medi-Cal when she would see me. She came in as a homeless free, essentially pro bono pay through my clinic. And I remember trying to get her social work help, people that would try to help her, and every single time she would decline. She's probably the most memorable patient for me for a lot of reasons because I felt like when I left UCI, there was a lot of unfinished business for me to try to help her. And oftentimes I still think of her today because it's these people that, I'll never forget. But again, think of a memorable patient and share with them why they're memorable to you. Do you have any questions for me? So in my opinion, this question is probably one of the most important questions, even though it's at the very end of your interview. But it is one of the most important questions because this question is twofold in its purpose. One is they're trying to gauge your actual interest in their program, right? Because if you're interested in their program, number one, you would have questions, but two, the type of questions you ask are important. So it's the insightfulness of your questions. Did you read up on their webpage? Do you have personal knowledge? Did you do your research and your due diligence to learn about what this program is special for? What is unique about them? You know, every program has an emphasis or a special thing in something they're proud of. You just have to kind of do some digging. right? And there's a lot of this can be gleaned from their web pages, and just Googling them and see what they're known for, right? Um, so the other piece of it is they're the higher level processing behind this question is when you ask questions that basically it requires another step in the sense of you're trying to envision what life would be like there if you were a resident, right? Imagine what would it be like. So one of the questions I love hearing is when they ask me about mentorship. So for example, let's say this is a program you had an opportunity to rotate through already. You could say, I saw firsthand, you know, um, some of the mentorship that the residents shared with me that they have the opportunity to go to. So can you share with me what mentorship, I want to learn more about it. Tell me what mentorship looks like for me when I'm a resident here. Is each faculty paired up with a resident, or is there one faculty for multiple residents? Is there a faculty that's geared towards certain special subspecialties that I'm geared with? And vice versa in the future, are there opportunities for me to mentor other people? If programs have that, they would be so proud of it, to be able to share that, because really it's such an important component of medical education. You can teach everyone and eventually medical knowledge, right? Those things come with time. But really is important to me, in my opinion, is that mentorship, because that really helps carry you further and it builds connections. It helps support you throughout your career. So I think, in my opinion, those are the most important elements. And I'm going to save this slide because this is the last slide of our presentation. But since Jennifer Wilson and I are here, do you have any questions for us at all? And it's okay if you don't have any questions. You can feel free to email us. Um, or if you want, you can always use my booking link. I will always make time for each and every one of you. And I know Jennifer Wilson will as well. We're here to support you throughout this interview season. And like I said, if you have any questions, if you'd like a mock interview, please let me know. We will find a time to meet. Jennifer Wilson and I are here to support you every single step of the way throughout this interview season. Okay.
Absolutely.
Um, oh, okay. I see something that just came through. So there's a question about, do you recommend looking at the camera? I'm sorry. Do you recommend looking at the camera or the person during the virtual interview? I think that's kind of a hard question. Personally for me, like I've been trying to look at the camera, but it's hard because I'm trying to read my PowerPoint too, as I've been doing this presentation with all of you. But what I would say is, if you can, I think what feels most natural to people, so that you got to picture it this way, right? What's going to make you feel most comfortable and most natural during this experience? And I think it's probably envisioning you were there, and most of the time you're going to be looking at someone's eyes, right? So I would recommend looking at the person, even though yes, you should probably look at the camera, but it's really hard to do that because like right now, honestly, as I see all of you, I'm not really able to do that because I'm trying to read the questions and everything. But the natural thing to do is to look at people's face, right? So that's what I would recommend, because ultimately you want to feel comfortable during this interview. Are there any other questions? I don't see any other questions. If there's no other questions, we can end this session. And like I said, I look forward to Jennifer Wilson and I look forward to helping you. And I know, Elizabeth, if you could do me a favor, I know, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I see here. I often find myself stumped when researching what makes a program unique. Do you have any advice to look forward to answer the question why our program without recycling? Okay, so again, like I mentioned to you earlier, the three-step method I shared with you is live, learn, and have fun. The learn part is where you're going to have to find those unique things, right? Programs will emphasize this. So, for example, one of the most unique things that all of you know I came from UC Irvine. One of the most unique things that UCI has is twofold. They're huge into indigent care and underserved medicine. But what exactly does that mean? A lot of programs will say that we're all about serving marginalized communities. But I will share with you all this info you can see from UCI, but sometimes you have to do a little digging. So, for example, UCI doesn't specifically advertise this, but they have a teaching kitchen there. It's not on any of their web pages. The only way you would be able to find it is from an article from the Orange County Register, which is one of the newspapers in this area. Um, so what their Learning Kitchen does is think about it. As a doctor, you tell people, let's work on diet and exercise. What does that mean? A lot of our patients, the only access to food they have is close to a 7-Eleven at the corner of their apartment or their street, right? They don't have access to go to a grocery store. But this teaching kitchen is twofold. One is there's a food pantry out of it on Saturday mornings, which again, you would only find out by Googling. So like I said earlier, yes, you've got to do some digging on their webpage, but also look up the newspapers around their area. I guarantee you someone's covered it at one point. Um, but they have a food pantry, and second, they actually have one of the the attendings there who actually has a special interest in this to actually teach how do you make a healthy meal out of these things that we get from the food pantry, right? And so I think that's a great thing that they do there, right? They also have a health scholars program where they have the residents in that program go to the local high schools that are underserved to talk about, what is it like for, a resident or people of disadvantaged backgrounds to even consider a career in medicine, right? That's what I think makes it unique. So, Elizabeth, when you put in quotations unique, you've got to kind of do some digging and do your research. And part of that is, yes, you're gonna have to look things up on Google. Obviously, look at their webpage. If they mention anything that you think is kind of interesting, type that in and on a separate Google search. I guarantee you'll find something on it.
Yes.
Um,
And then to add to that, Dr. Wynn, if when you get your invites to the programs, a lot of times they're going to offer you to have a meet and greet the night before, or maybe a session before your interview with residents. And so a lot of times you will get insightful information from these sessions. So always please try to attend those, and because you will hear different information, and it's things that you will help you through the interview process because it's going to connect you with your interviewer.
the other thing I would emphasize also is as if you get a chance to look at the Okra webpage, there is a section on there where you can see where your former alumni have matched for certain specialties. Actually, it's for every single specialty. Every specialty that anyone has ever matched at here at UCR is on our webpage. De-identified, of course, right? But if you get a chance, look at some of those programs because they're more willing to obviously, consider us because they already have someone from our school there, right? Go on their webpage and look to see if you can find, if it's one of your former classmates and whatnot, and try to reach out to them. That's the other thing. Maybe you can talk to them about their program. So just some other food for thought. I know there's another comment here, but it looks like the question once we can ask after we're done recording. Are there any other questions while we still have the recording going? Otherwise, we can, Elizabeth, we can stop if everyone agrees. Okay, Elizabeth, let's stop recording, and then